When he was 18, a boy who had spent the last decade in the system inherited a piece of forgotten land. But what he discovered buried there wasn't just his grandmother's secret. It was a second chance at a life he never thought he'd have. This is that story, and if you've ever felt lost or like the world had given up on you, I want you to hit that subscribe button because the stories we share here are for you. They're a reminder that even when you feel buried, you can still find your way back to the light. The air in Mr. Albright's office was the same temperature as my skin, a perfect, sterile neutrality that made me feel like I wasn't there at all. It smelled of old paper and new carpet, a smell I associated with official bad news. For 10 years, ever since I'd entered the system at 8 years old, men in rooms like this had decided my life. Social workers, judges, therapists. They all had the same calm, detached tone, the same way of looking at a file instead of at me. Mr. Albright, my grandmother's lawyer, was no different. He had thin silver hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He kept adjusting them, a small, repetitive motion that was the only sign of any agitation in the room. I sat in a leather chair that was too big for me, my worn-out jeans and hoodie a stark contrast to the polished mahogany desk between us. My social worker, Carol, sat beside me, a silent, court-appointed chaperone for my first day of legal adulthood. My 18th birthday had been 2 days ago. The state had given me a debit card with $500 on it, a duffel bag of my few belongings, and a list of shelters. Then Carol had picked me up and said, "There's one last piece of business." And that business was my grandmother, the woman who had dropped me off at a children's services office a decade ago with a note pinned to my jacket that just said, "I can't do this anymore. His name is Leo," and then vanished from my life. For 10 years, she was a ghost, a question mark, a raw nerve. I'd spent my childhood making up stories about her. In some, she was a spy on a secret mission. In others, a glamorous actress who would one day return in a limousine to rescue me. As I got older, the stories soured. She was a coward. She was selfish. She was the reason I bounced between 6 different foster homes, never quite belonging anywhere. She was the reason I had trust issues the size of this city. Now, she was dead. Mr. Albright had made that clear on the phone, and she had left a will. "As you know," Mr. Albright began, shuffling a thin stack of papers, "your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, passed away 3 months ago. The probate process has been concluded." He spoke her name as if it were just a name, not the axis my entire world had once tilted on. I said nothing. I'd learned early on that saying nothing was safer. Carol shifted in her chair, a silent prompt for me to be polite. I ignored it. "Her estate was not substantial," the lawyer continued, his eyes flicking over the top of his glasses at me. "There were significant debts which have been settled. What remains is a small parcel of land, 5 acres, in a town called Havenwood. It's rural, quite remote." He slid a large, folded document across the desk, a deed. My name was typed neatly on a new line, Leo Vance. It looked wrong, alien. Vance was a name I hadn't used since the first foster home where the other kids had made fun of it. I'd been Leo Miller, Leo Jenkins, Leo Santiago. I'd been whoever they told me to be. The property includes a small house and a barn, both in significant disrepair. Frankly, the land's primary value is in its timber and its potential for development. In fact, he paused, pulling another sleeker-looking folder from his briefcase. "I've already been contacted by a development group, Northwood Holdings. They've been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for a resort project. They're offering $50,000 for it, as is." $50,000. The number hung in the air, thick and unbelievable. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was a new life, an apartment, a car, a chance to not end up on the streets. It was an escape. Carol let out a small, impressed puff of air. "Leo," she said, her voice soft. That's wonderful. That's a real start." Mr. Albright nodded. "It's a fair offer, likely the best you'll get, considering the state of the property. I can facilitate the sale. We could have the funds transferred to you within a week." A clean break, money in the bank. The final transactional end to the story of my grandmother. All I had to do was sign a paper, and the last piece of her would be erased, converted into cash. It was what she deserved, wasn't it? For the abandonment, for the silence, to be sold off to the highest bidder. "I'll think about it," I heard myself say. The words felt foreign. Mr. Albright raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Of course. The offer stands for 30 days. He pushed the developer's folder toward me. "Now, there is one other item. It was a specific, notarized addendum to the will, quite unusual." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished object. It was an old, heavy brass key. It wasn't a house key. It was thick, almost medieval, with a complex, gear-like bit at the end. A small, yellowed tag was tied to it with a piece of string. In faded ink, I could just make out one word: dig. "She left this for you," Mr. Albright said, his voice stripped of its legal dryness for a moment. "Her instructions were that it be given to you directly, and only to you, on your 18th birthday. She was very insistent on that point." He held it out to me. I didn't move. My hands were slick with sweat. A key. After 10 years of silence, a key. It was a joke, a cruel, pointless gesture. What was it for? A box of old teacups? A diary full of excuses? "What does it open?" I asked, my voice tight. "She didn't say," he replied, his professional mask back in place. "The will only stated that the key, and I quote, opens the only thing that matters." There was also a sealed envelope. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. My name was on it, written in a spidery, elegant script that I felt in my bones I should recognize. It felt heavier than it should. I stared at the key in his palm, then at the envelope. It was a choice. Take them, and I was stepping into her mystery. Leave them, and I was taking the money, closing the door for good. My whole life had been about having no choices. Now, here were two. After a long moment, I reached out and took the key. Its weight was surprising, cold and solid in my palm. Then I took the envelope. I didn't open it. I just held it. Mr. Albright nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was respect. "The deed is in your name now, Leo. The property taxes are paid for the year. What you do with it, and with that key, is up to you." Carol drove me back to the transitional housing unit, a grim concrete building that smelled of bleach and despair. She was trying to be cheerful, talking about financial advisors and apartment applications. I just stared out the window at the city blurring past, the weight of the key a cold spot in my pocket. The $50,000 was safety. It was logic. It was the smart move, the one everyone in that office expected me to make. But the key was a question. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the pull of something other than survival. I felt the dangerous, terrifying flicker of hope. The transitional housing unit was a single room with a bed bolted to the floor, a metal desk, and a window that overlooked a brick wall. It was the physical embodiment of a dead end. I'd been there for 2 days, and the silence was already getting to me. In foster care, there was always noise. Younger kids crying, TVs blaring, the constant low-grade hum of a house full of people who weren't quite family. Here, the silence was absolute. It gave my thoughts too much room to echo. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the contents of my life spread out before me. The duffel bag from the state, the folder from the developer, its glossy pages promising a future I couldn't quite picture. And on the desk, the key and the unopened envelope. For 10 years, I'd cultivated a hard shell of resentment around the memory of my grandmother. It was a shield. If I hated her, I didn't have to miss her. If she was a monster, then my life made a kind of tragic sense. But the key didn't feel monstrous. It felt purposeful. The envelope, with my name in that elegant script, didn't feel cruel. It felt personal. I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive. I ran my thumb over the sealed flap. Breaking it felt like a point of no return. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. With a deep breath, I ripped it open. Inside wasn't a letter, not a long one anyway. It was a single sheet of matching paper folded around a bus ticket. The note was short, just a few lines in that same spidery hand. Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I know you have questions. I know I hurt you. I can't undo the past, but I can give you the truth. It's in Havenwood. It's all there. This ticket will get you there. What you do when you arrive is your choice. It always was. Love, Grandma L. Love. The word was a punch to the gut. She had no right to that word, not after what she did. And yet, my eyes pricked with tears I refused to let fall. I unfolded the bus ticket. It was for a Greyhound, departing the next morning for a town I'd never heard of until an hour ago. Havenwood. The name sounded like something from a fairy tale. Underneath the ticket, a smaller piece of paper was tucked in. It was a hand-drawn map, sketched in the same ink as the letter. It showed a simple layout of a town square, a road leading out, and a star marking a spot labeled Vance Property. Below the map were 2 sentences. The cellar door is under the porch, behind the dead roses. The key is not for the house. The cellar door. The key is not for the house. And the word on the tag, dig. A cold thrill ran down my spine, cutting through the anger and confusion. This wasn't a simple inheritance. It was a puzzle, a scavenger hunt designed by a ghost. I looked at the glossy Northwood Holdings brochure again. Pictures of smiling families, pristine golf courses, sparkling blue lakes. A life of ease. A check for $50,000. I could take it. I could get on a different bus, go anywhere, and start over. No one would blame me. It was the sane choice. But I was a product of the system. The system was all about sane choices, about probabilities and risk assessments. It was about putting you in the box where you fit best. And for 10 years I had fit. I had been quiet, compliant, invisible. I had done what I was told. But holding that key, that map, that ticket, I felt a stirring of something I hadn't felt since I was a little boy, before the note was pinned to my jacket. I felt like me, Leo Vance. I spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, the key clutched in my hand. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest. But now it had a new companion, a deep, aching curiosity. Why did she leave? Why was the truth hidden in a cellar? What did she want me to find? What was so important that it had to be buried? The questions spun in my head, a whirlwind that blew away all thoughts of money and apartments. By the time the gray morning light filtered through the grimy window, I had made my decision. I packed the duffel bag, leaving behind the few items that belonged to the state. I put the developer's brochure in the trash can. I tucked the map and the key into the inner pocket of my hoodie. When I walked out of that building, I didn't look back. I walked to the bus station, the city noise a roar in my ears. It was a city of ghosts for me, ghosts of who I could have been, ghosts of the family I'd never had. The bus was old, smelling of disinfectant and diesel fumes. I found a seat by a window and watched the skyscrapers and concrete give way to suburbs, then to strip malls, and finally to open country. The bus ride to Havenwood was like traveling back in time. The 4-lane highways narrowed to 2-lane country roads. The franchise stores and gas stations were replaced by small, independent shops with faded paint and handwritten signs. The world outside my window turned green and overgrown. We passed fields of corn, dense patches of forest, and run-down farmhouses with satellite dishes on their roofs. With every mile, the city and its promises of anonymous, cash-fueled freedom receded. With every mile, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What was I doing? I was a city kid, born and raised. The deepest I'd ever been into the country was a mandatory school trip to a pumpkin patch in 3rd grade. This was different. This was real. The air that hissed from the bus's vents started to smell different, less like exhaust, more like damp earth and pine needles. The other passengers were few and far between. An elderly woman who got off at a town called Millersburg, a young soldier in uniform who slept most of the way, a mother with 2 restless children. No one spoke to me. I was invisible, just the way I liked it. I kept my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around the cold, hard reality of the key. It was my anchor in this sea of uncertainty. I took out the map again. It was simple, almost childlike. But looking at it now, I saw the care in the lines, the way the road curved just so, the little cluster of squares that must be the town's center. This was a place she knew, a place she was trying to guide me through, even in death. The anger I'd felt in the lawyer's office had cooled, leaving behind a hollow ache. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of being a piece of paper in a file. Tired of being a problem to be solved. Tired of being alone. Maybe this trip wasn't about finding answers about her. Maybe it was about finding something, anything, for me. After 6 hours, the bus driver called out, "Havenwood! Next stop, Havenwood!" My heart gave a painful lurch. I was the only one left on the bus. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked to the front. "This is it?" I asked, looking out at a single blinking traffic light, a gas station, and a diner. "This is it," the driver said, not unkindly. "End of the line for this route. You need a ride back. We come through at 7 a.m. tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word sounded impossibly far away. I stepped off the bus and the door hissed shut behind me. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the bus as it turned around and drove away, leaving me in a cloud of diesel smoke. I was alone on the side of the road. The air was thick and humid, smelling of rain and cut grass. I looked at the town. It was small, smaller than I'd even imagined. A row of brick buildings, a post office, a grocery store with a sign that said "closed," and the diner whose neon sign flickered, "Eat." I pulled out the map. The town square. This had to be it. According to the sketch, I needed to find a road called Old Mill Road, leading out of town. I saw a street sign, half hidden by an overgrown tree. It was my road. The walk was longer than I expected. The pavement quickly turned to gravel, and the houses grew farther apart until there were no houses at all, just dense walls of trees on either side of the road. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that looked like grasping fingers. The sounds of the forest grew louder, the rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth, the hoot of an owl, the wind whispering through the leaves. It should have been terrifying. Part of me was terrified. The city kid part, the part that knew how to navigate subway systems and concrete alleyways, was screaming that this was a mistake. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part, felt a strange sense of peace. This was real. The dirt under my feet was real. The trees were real. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of life. After what felt like an hour, I saw it. A rusted, wrought-iron gate, half swallowed by vines, hanging crookedly on a single hinge. Beyond it, a dirt driveway disappeared into the gloom. There was no mailbox, no number, but it matched the location on the map. This was it, the Vance property. I pushed the gate. It groaned in protest but swung open. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn-out sneakers. The trees opened up into a clearing, and I saw the house. My breath caught in my throat. Significant disrepair was an understatement. It was a skeleton, a two-story farmhouse, its paint peeled away to gray, weathered wood. The porch sagged dangerously, and several windows were boarded up or broken. A huge oak tree had fallen at some point, its branches crushing a corner of the roof. To the side, the barn was in even worse shape, leaning at an angle that defied physics. It was a ruin, a monument to neglect, and it was mine. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the house, a silhouette against the deepening twilight. A wave of despair washed over me. This was a fool's errand. The developers were right. The only value here was in tearing it all down. There was nothing here for me but decay and broken promises. I was about to turn around, to walk back to that lonely road and wait for the 7 a.m. bus, when I remembered the note. The cellar door is under the porch, behind the dead roses. I walked cautiously onto the sagging porch, testing each board before putting my full weight on it. At the far end, tucked against the wall of the house, was a thick, thorny tangle of what must have once been a rose bush. It was a wall of dead gray canes, some as thick as my thumb. Behind it, I could just make out a dark space beneath the porch floor. I started pulling at the dead branches. The thorns tore at my hands and my hoodie, drawing blood. It was a slow, painful process. Every pull felt like I was fighting the house itself, fighting the years of neglect. It was as if the property didn't want to give up its secrets. Finally, after 10 minutes of wrestling with the thorns, I had cleared enough space to see. There, flat against the ground and covered in dirt and leaves, was a heavy wooden door with a large iron ring for a handle. The cellar door. My heart began to pound again, a heavy, hopeful drumbeat. I knelt and cleared the remaining dirt away. The wood was damp and soft in places, but it seemed solid enough. I grabbed the iron ring with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled again, bracing my feet against the foundation of the house, my muscles straining. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning shudder that seemed to come from the earth itself, The door lifted a few inches. A blast of cold, musty air hit my face. It smelled of damp soil, of things left in the dark for a very, very long time. I propped the door open with a loose brick and peered into the darkness. A set of steep stone steps led down into blackness. I took out my phone, the one issued by the state, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a weak path into the gloom. The steps were slick with moisture. I took a deep breath and started down. The air grew colder with each step. The stone walls were cool and slimy to the touch. At the bottom, the flashlight beam revealed a small, stone-lined cellar. It was empty, save for cobwebs, a few broken jars, and a thick layer of dust on the packed earth floor. Disappointment hit me like a physical blow. This was it? An empty root cellar? I swung the light around the small space, my hope shriveling. Had I come all this way for nothing? Then the light caught something. On the far wall, a patch of the packed earth seemed different, darker, more disturbed. I walked over and knelt. I remembered the word on the key's tag. Dig. I started scraping at the dirt with my bare hands. It was cold and damp. I dug for a few inches, my fingers growing numb, until they hit something hard. Not stone. Metal. My heart leaped. I dug faster, frantically clearing the dirt away. First, I uncovered a flat metal surface. Then a lock. A huge, industrial-looking padlock, rusted but formidable. And next to it, a keyhole. It wasn't a padlock. It was part of what I was uncovering. I kept digging, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I uncovered the edges of a thick steel door, set flush into the floor of the cellar. It wasn't a cellar. It was the entrance to something else. I scrambled back up the steps and into the dying light, my hands covered in mud. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The key. The heavy, brass, impossible key. I went back down into the dark, the beam of my phone shaking. I knelt before the steel door and with a trembling hand inserted the key into the lock. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't fit. The lock was old, the key was old. But then, with a small click, it slid all the way in. I took a deep breath, grabbed the bow of the key with both hands, and turned. The sound was deafening in the small space. A series of loud mechanical clunks, like the gears of a giant clock turning. A deep, resonant thunk echoed from within the door. I turned the key back and removed it. I found a small, recessed handle and pulled. The steel door was heavy, but it lifted smoothly on well-oiled hinges. It opened onto another set of steps, these made of steel, leading down into an even deeper darkness. But from this opening, there was no musty smell. Instead, a current of clean, dry, sterile air flowed out, as if from a sealed environment. And with it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum. This wasn't a cellar. This wasn't a root store. This was a bunker. My grandmother, the woman I thought had nothing, the woman who had abandoned me because she couldn't do it anymore, had built a bunker, and she had left me the key. My mind reeled. Nothing made sense. I stood at the threshold of this new mystery, the darkness below beckoning. I had a choice. I could close the door, walk away, and take the $50,000. Or I could go down those steps. I took a breath and stepped into the dark. The steel stairs descended about 15 feet, ending on a solid concrete floor. As my feet touched the bottom, a motion sensor kicked in, and a series of soft fluorescent lights flickered on, humming to life down a long, narrow corridor. The sudden light was blinding. I blinked, my eyes adjusting, and looked around in stunned disbelief. This was not some makeshift storm shelter. This was professional. The walls were smooth, reinforced concrete. The air was cool and circulated by a quiet ventilation system, the source of the hum I'd heard. It smelled like a library, the scent of old paper, dry air, and time. The corridor stretched about 30 feet ahead of me, with several metal doors on one side. At the far end, it opened into a larger room. I walked forward slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The first door was labeled Pantry. I opened it. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves were stacked with military-grade MREs, canned goods, and huge containers of water. Enough food and water to last for years. My mind couldn't process it. Why? The next door was generator. A large diesel generator sat silent, connected to a bank of batteries and a huge fuel tank. Everything looked clean, maintained. The third door was a small bathroom, functional and spotless. At the end of the hall, I stepped into the main room. It was about 20 by 20 feet, and it took my breath away. It wasn't a survivalist's den, it was a study. A life, packed into a box. One wall was lined with bookshelves, filled with novels, history books, poetry. Another wall held a simple cot, neatly made, with a folded quilt at the foot. There was a large desk with a comfortable-looking chair, a ham radio set, and maps of the local area, the state, the country, pinned to a corkboard. And on the desk, placed squarely in the center, as if it had been waiting for me, was a single, large, wooden box. It was a beautiful chest, dark wood bound with brass. There was no lock. I approached it slowly, my heart a painful knot in my chest. This was it. This was the reason for the key, for the bunker, for the trip. This was the truth. My hands trembled as I reached out and lifted the heavy lid. The inside was lined with velvet, and it was filled with letters, dozens of them, bundles of envelopes, tied with faded ribbons, each one addressed to me. Leo, age 9. Leo, age 10. Leo, age 12. One for every year. There were also stacks of cassette tapes, each labeled with a date, and beneath them all, wrapped in oilcloth, were thick, dense bricks of what looked like money. I pulled one out. It was a stack of $100 bills. I lifted another, and another. There were dozens of them. It was a fortune. Far, far more than the $50,000 the developers were offering. I dropped the stack of cash back into the box as if it had burned me. The money didn't matter. It was the letters. I fumbled for the first bundle, the one labeled Leo, age 9. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the ribbon. The first envelope was dated just a few weeks after she had left me. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. The handwriting was the same as the note in the lawyer's office, but it was shaky, stained with what looked like teardrops. "My dearest Leo," it began. "I don't know if you will ever read this. I pray you do. I am writing this from a place you wouldn't understand, a place of fear and love. I want you to know, first and foremost, that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was like tearing my own heart out. You are the sun and the moon to me, my little lion. Please, never, ever doubt that." I had to stop. I sat down hard on the edge of the cot, the letters shaking in my hand. I couldn't breathe. The words were a balm and a wound at the same time. I read on. "I need you to understand. Your grandfather, he wasn't a good man. I thought he was once. He was charming, but he had a dark side, a world he was involved in that I didn't know about until it was too late. He got in deep with some very dangerous people. When he died, they thought his debt passed to me, to us. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't about her not being able to cope. This was about something else entirely. They came to the house, Leo. A man named Marcus. He was your grandfather's old partner. He said we owed him. He threatened us. He threatened you. I saw the look in his eyes. He would have hurt you to get to me, to get the money he thought we had. I knew I couldn't protect you. Not out here. Not with them knowing where we lived. The only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear, to make you a ghost in the system where they could never find you, where you would be fed and clothed and safe, safer than you ever would have been with me. I dropped the letter. My carefully constructed image of my grandmother, the selfish coward, shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't abandonment. It was a rescue, a brutal, agonizing, soul-crushing act of protection. She hadn't thrown me away. She had hidden me. I looked around the bunker, at the food, the generator, the books. This wasn't for her. This was for me. This was the backup plan. If the world went to hell, if she couldn't fix the problem, this was where we were supposed to end up. Together. I picked up the next bundle of letters. And the next. For hours I sat on that cot and read. I read about her life in hiding, moving from town to town, working odd jobs, always looking over her shoulder. I read about how she followed my life from a distance, getting updates through a private investigator she paid with the money she squirreled away. She knew about my foster homes. She knew about my grades in school. She knew I liked to draw. She knew I hated peas. Mrs. Santiago seems kind, she wrote in one letter. The investigator says you have your own room. I hope you have a window that gets the morning sun. In another, you won an art contest. I cried when I saw the picture of your drawing in the local paper online. A dragon. You always loved dragons. I have it printed out and taped to the wall. You have my hands, you know, an artist's hands. She had been there all along, a silent, invisible guardian angel. The anger I had carried for a decade dissolved, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it knocked the wind out of me. I cried. I curled up on that cot, clutching her letters, and I sobbed. I cried for the little boy who thought he was unloved. I cried for the young woman who had to give up everything. I cried for the grandmother I never got to know, the woman who had spent the last years of her life in fear, alone, writing letters to a boy who hated her. I cried until there were no tears left, leaving only a vast, aching emptiness. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with a stiff neck, the letters scattered around me on the cot. The lights of the bunker were still humming, a constant, steady presence. The emptiness I felt before was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't a void. It was a space waiting to be filled. I sat up and looked at the wooden chest again. The money. The cassette tapes. I picked up a tape labeled with a date from about 5 years ago and found an old cassette player on one of the shelves. I put it in and pressed play. Her voice filled the silence. It was older than I imagined, a little gravelly but warm. It was the voice of a storyteller. "Leo," she said, and hearing my name in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "If you're listening to this, it means the letters weren't enough. Or maybe you just wanted to hear my voice. I don't blame you. Sometimes I talk to myself down here just to hear a voice, too." There was a soft, dry chuckle. It was a sound that felt like home. "The money. I need to explain the money. Your grandfather wasn't just in debt. He was a thief. He and that man Marcus, they stole a lot of money. It was supposed to be their retirement, but your grandfather got scared. He took his half and ran. He met me. He never told me where the money came from, just that we had to be careful. He buried it, right here on this land, before he built the house. He was always paranoid. After he died, I found his journals. I found the money. I wanted to turn it in, to give it back. But then Marcus showed up. And I knew if I gave it to the police, he would know. He would come after us. So I kept it. I used it. I used it to pay the investigator to watch over you. I used it to build this place, our ark, and I saved the rest. For you. She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. It's dirty money, Leo. I know that. It's a weight. And now I'm afraid it's your weight to carry. You can take it and run, disappear, live a life of comfort. No one would blame you. Or you can use it. You can make something good out of it. You can turn this land, this tainted ground, into something clean. You can build a home. Our home. The tape clicked off. A home. The word echoed in the silent bunker. I looked at the money, then at the books, then at the neatly made cot. She hadn't just left me a choice between selling and keeping. She had left me a choice between running and building, between being a victim of my past and being the architect of my future. I felt a surge of anger, but this time it was different. It was a clean, hot, righteous anger. Anger at Marcus. Anger at my grandfather. Anger at the years that had been stolen from us. But it was also a powerful, motivating force. I wouldn't run. I had been running my whole life, or rather, I had been moved around like a pawn. This was the first time I had a piece of the board that was mine. I spent the rest of the day in the bunker, organizing. I read every letter, listened to every tape. I pieced together the story of her lonely, vigilant life. She had fought for me in the only way she knew how. She had armed me not with weapons, but with truth, with resources, and with a choice. As evening approached, I knew what I had to do. This bunker was a sanctuary, but it was also a tomb. It was her past. My future was up there, in the sunlight. Before I left, I found a small framed photo on the desk I hadn't noticed before. It was of a young woman with kind eyes and a familiar sad smile, holding a little boy with a wild mane of blonde hair on her lap. Me. I was maybe 4 years old. We were sitting on the steps of the house upstairs, the real house, when it was still new and full of hope. We were both smiling. I carefully tucked the photo into my pocket. Then, I turned off the main power to the bunker, leaving only the emergency systems active. I climbed the steel steps, my legs feeling stronger than they had a day ago. I pushed the heavy steel door closed. It sealed with a satisfying final thud. I climbed the stone steps out of the cellar, emerging from the ground like I was being reborn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. It cast a golden light on the ruined house, and for the first time, I didn't see a skeleton. I saw potential. I saw the house from the photograph. I saw a home waiting to be healed. I walked to the edge of the porch and pulled out my phone. The battery was low, but I had a signal. I found the number for Mr. Albright's office in my call history. It was late, but I hoped he might have an after-hours line. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I almost hung up, but her voice echoed in my head. "It's your choice. It always was." "Mr. Albright," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is Leo Vance. I'm calling about the property. I've been thinking about the offer from Northwood Holdings. Tell them thank you, but the answer is no. I'm not selling. This is my home now." I hung up before he could answer, before I could second-guess myself. A deep sense of peace settled over me. The choice was made. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. Now, I want to pause for a second. If you've made it this far in the story, thank you. I'm guessing something in it is resonating with you. Maybe it's the feeling of being misunderstood, of having a story that no one has ever bothered to listen to. My grandmother gave me the gift of my own story. And in this community we're building, that's what I want for you. So if this is hitting you, if you've ever had to reclaim your own history, just type, "I'm here," in the comments. You don't have to share the details, just let us know you're part of this. It's a way of saying you're not invisible. Okay, let's get back to it. The night was falling fast. I was alone, on a piece of land in the middle of nowhere, with a ruined house, a secret bunker, and a choice that had just set me against a powerful company. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was energized. The first night, I slept in the bunker. It was the only safe, clean place. But it felt wrong. It was her space, her sanctuary. It was the past. I couldn't live there. The next morning, I woke with the sun, a habit I didn't know I had. I climbed out of the bunker and took a long, hard look at the task ahead. The house was daunting. The fallen tree on the roof was the most immediate problem. The barn looked like a strong wind would take it down. The grounds were a jungle. Where to even start? Her voice on the tape came back to me. You can build a home. Building a home isn't one grand act. It's 1,000 small ones. So I started small. I found a rusty pair of shears in the barn and began to clear the thorns from the porch. My hands, which had been torn up the first time, were now protected by a pair of old work gloves I found in the bunker. It was slow, tedious work. With every snip, I felt like I was clearing away not just dead wood, but old pain. I was making a space for something new to grow. Around noon, a pickup truck I didn't recognize rumbled up the driveway. My first instinct was to hide, the old reflex. But I stood my ground, shears in hand. A man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a baseball cap, got out. He looked me up and down. "You must be the Vance kid," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Leo," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "Name's George. I own the feed store in town," he said, gesturing vaguely back toward the road. "Albright called me, said you were staying." Mr. Albright. A flicker of surprise, then gratitude. The lawyer wasn't just a suit, he was a connection. "He also said you might need a hand," George continued. He walked over to the fallen oak tree, slapping his hand against its massive trunk. "This is a widow-maker. You can't leave it there. It'll bring the whole roof down." "I know," I said, feeling helpless. "I don't know what to do about it." George squinted at the tree, then at me. "Got a chainsaw?" I must have looked at him like he was speaking another language. He let out a short laugh. "Right, city kid. Look, I've got one, and my boy and I have a free afternoon. We can get this cut up and off your roof before supper time. For a price." I thought of the bricks of cash in the bunker. "How much?" "Tell you what," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your grandmother, Elle, she was a good woman. Always paid her bills on time, always had a kind word. She bought her garden supplies from me for 20 years. Let's just call this a welcome to the neighborhood gift. You can pay me back when you're on your feet." He didn't wait for an answer. He just nodded, got back in his truck, and drove away. An hour later, he was back with his son, 2 chainsaws, and a heavy-duty winch. For the rest of the day, I watched and helped as they methodically dismantled the massive tree. They worked with an easy, practiced efficiency that was mesmerizing. They didn't ask about my past. They didn't ask about the bunker or the money. They just worked. They cut the trunk into manageable logs, which they stacked neatly by the barn. "Good for firewood this winter," George said. They used the winch to pull the last of the heavy branches off the roof, revealing a gaping hole. "You'll need to get that tarped up before the next rain," was all he said. As the sun began to set, they packed up their tools. I tried to offer them money again, pulling a few $100 bills from my pocket. George just shook his head. "Keep it. You'll need it. Just do right by the place, kid. Elle would have wanted that." He handed me a thermos. "My wife sent you some stew. You look like you could use it." I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, holding a thermos of hot stew. It was the first home-cooked meal I'd had in a decade. I sat on the steps, the same steps from the photograph, and ate. The stew was thick and savory, and it warmed me from the inside out. It tasted like kindness. It tasted like community. That night, I didn't sleep in the bunker. I found a corner of the porch that was dry and swept it clean. I brought up the cot and the quilt. I slept under the stars, with the sounds of the forest around me, the smell of sawdust and damp earth in the air. I was finally home. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Wake with the sun, work until my muscles screamed, eat, sleep, repeat. I started with the house, using money from the bunker, clean money, I told myself, laundered by good intentions. I bought a huge tarp and covered the hole in the roof. I bought lumber and glass and began, slowly and clumsily, to replace the broken windows. I learned from YouTube videos, from old books in the bunker's library, and from trial and error. Mostly error. My first attempt at framing a window was so crooked it looked like something from a funhouse. But I tore it out and did it again, and again, until it was right. I wasn't just repairing a house. I was learning a new language, the language of self-reliance. Every nail I hammered, every board I sawed, was a declaration. I am here. I am building. I am not leaving. Mr. Albright called once a week. At first, his tone was cautiously professional. He gave me updates on Northwood Holdings. They had formally rescinded their offer. They were monitoring the situation. That sounded ominous, but I had other things to worry about, like the raccoon that had taken up residence in the attic. As the weeks turned into a month, the lawyer's calls became less about business and more about me. "How's the roof, Leo? Did you figure out that plumbing issue?" He'd even had his secretary send me a PDF of a building permit application. He was, in his own quiet, pragmatic way, on my side. He was my ally in the world of paper and rules, while George was my ally in the world of dirt and wood. George would stop by every few days, ostensibly to drop off supplies I'd ordered, but really to check on me. He'd inspect my work with a critical eye, grunt, and then show me a better way to do it. He never praised me directly, but one afternoon he said, "You got good hands, just like your grandma." It was the highest compliment I had ever received. I started clearing the land around the house. I found the outlines of my grandmother's old garden, choked with weeds. I spent a week on my hands and knees, pulling, digging, turning over the soil. I found old, rusted garden markers, tomatoes, zucchini, roses. I decided to bring it back to life. It was my way of talking to her, of continuing her work. One afternoon, while I was digging near the porch, my shovel hit something. Another box. This one was smaller, a metal lockbox, rusted but sealed. My heart pounded. I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, protected by a plastic bag, was a thick journal. It was my grandfather's, the final piece of the puzzle. I sat on the porch and read it. It was the confession of a man who had made a terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life terrified of the consequences. He wrote about Marcus, about the money, about his love for Eleanor and his fear that he had ruined her life. The last entry was dated the day before he died of a heart attack. I see him in the cars that drive by too slowly. I hear his voice on the phone when no one is there. He will never stop. I have cursed my family. My only hope is that Elle is strong enough, stronger than me. She has to be. And she was. She had been strong enough for both of them, strong enough to protect his secret, to raise a son, to plan for a grandson, to face down a monster, and to build an ark. She had carried the weight of his sins so that I wouldn't have to. I closed the journal and placed it in the box with her letters. The story was complete. It was a tragedy, but it was also a love story. A story of sacrifice and strength. And it was my story. The next day, a shiny black SUV I didn't recognize came up the driveway. A man in a suit got out. He was slick, polished, and out of place. "Leo Vance?" he asked, a predatory smile on his face. "I'm from Northwood Holdings. I think we need to have a chat." The antagonistic force wasn't a document anymore. It had a face. He walked around the property, pointing out the flaws. The leaning barn, the work I still had to do. He talked about the benefits to the community, jobs, tourism. He painted a picture of progress. Then he made his move. "Look, kid, we know the history here. We know about the money. We can make that all go away. We can offer you $200,000, cash, clean, and a guarantee that no one ever looks into the source of your family's original wealth." It was a threat and a bribe, all in one. The old me, the scared kid from the system, would have been terrified. I would have seen the trap, the way they could use my grandfather's crime against me. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I looked at the man, at his expensive suit and his cheap smile, and I thought of my grandmother's strength. I thought of George's kindness. I thought of the feeling of soil on my hands and the satisfaction of a straight cut. "This land isn't for sale," I said, my voice calm. "It's not property. It's my home." He scoffed. "It's a ruin. You're a kid playing homesteader. You'll be broke and alone in a year. We can wait." "I'm not alone," I said. And for the first time, I knew it was true. He saw the look in my eyes, the certainty. He knew he had lost. His smile vanished. He got back in his SUV and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust. I never saw him again. The work didn't stop. It never does. That's what I've learned. Building a life is a constant process of repair, of maintenance, of planting new things and pulling up weeds. The barn is still leaning, but it's braced now. The house has new windows and a solid roof. The garden produced a small, misshapen crop of tomatoes last summer, and they were the best thing I've ever tasted. I found a local contractor, a friend of George's, who was helping me draw up plans to renovate the house properly, using the best of the old structure and making it new. We're going to use some of the logs from the fallen oak tree for the new support beams in the living room. Taking something that fell and using it to hold the house up. It feels right. The money from the bunker, my grandfather's tainted legacy, is being cleaned, one board and one nail at a time. I'm turning it into a home, my home. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I go down into the bunker. I don't stay long, but I like to stand there in the quiet and look at her books, at the map on the wall, at the empty space on the desk where the box of letters used to be. I brought them up into the house. They belong in the light. I think about the story, not just my story, but hers and his. It's a story about bad choices and their echoes, but it's also about the fierce, stubborn, beautiful power of a grandmother's love. It's about the idea that inheritance isn't just about what you're given, it's about what you choose to do with it. She didn't just give me a key to a bunker. She gave me a key to myself. She gave me a past I could understand, and in doing so, gave me a future I could build. I'm not the scared, angry kid who walked into that lawyer's office anymore. I'm Leo Vance. I'm a son, a grandson, a builder, and I'm home. This place, this Havenwood, has become my haven. The people here, they don't know the whole story, not the details. They don't know about the bunker or the money. But they know I'm Elle's grandson, and for them, that's enough. They've accepted me. I'm part of the landscape now, like the old stone walls that run through the woods. The story isn't over. In a way, it's just beginning. There are still so many things to fix, to build, to grow. But that's what life is, isn't it? It's not about arriving at a perfect, finished place. It's about the work. It's about showing up, day after day, and doing what needs to be done. It's about taking what is broken and making it whole again. And that brings me back to you. I told you this story because I believe our stories are the most valuable things we own. They shape us, they define us, but they don't have to trap us. You can be the hero of your own story, even if the early chapters were written by someone else. You can take the inheritance you were given, the good, the bad, the painful, the beautiful, and you can build something new with it. Maybe your inheritance isn't a piece of land. Maybe it's a lesson you learned the hard way. Maybe it's a talent you've been afraid to use. Maybe it's a pain you've been carrying that you're finally ready to set down or to transform into strength. Whatever it is, it's yours. And the choice of what to do with it is yours too. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a community here, a place for people who know that life isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. And I want you to do one more thing for me. In the comments below, I don't want you to tell me your whole story, unless you want to. I just want you to tell me one thing you're choosing to build in your life right now. It could be a relationship, a skill, a garden, your own confidence. Let's fill this space with what we're building, not what's been broken. I'll be reading every single one, because your story matters. We all have our own bunkers to unlock, our own ruins to rebuild. And the most important thing to remember is that you don't have to do it alone. Welcome home.